At 2:30 in the afternoon on July 11th, 1897, a balloon took off from the Norwegian archipelago of Spitzbergen, headed, its occupants believed, for the North Pole. It was a novel idea, years in the making, that promised to reach the elusive pole in a way that was faster and safer than trudging across the ice. It is a daring, or perhaps foolhardy tale of a time of Arctic exploration that deserves to be remembered. The 19th century was a bold age of exploration, and among the many places drawing attention was the North, where the search for the Northwest Passage and race to be the first to reach the North Pole prompted numerous expeditions. The Bozeman, Montana-based Property and Environment Research Center notes that Arctic exploration dominated popular culture in the 19th century in Europe and America, much as space exploration did in the 20th century. There were four major goals of 19th century polar exploration: the discovery and navigation of the Northwest Passage, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans via a northern route, reaching the North Pole, traversing Greenland, and discovering the fate of the lost John Franklin expedition of 1845. The last goal was telling. Part of what drove exploration was the quest to find previous explorers who had left and never returned. Royal Navy Captain Sir John Franklin had left with two well-supplied ships and 129 officers and men. None was ever seen again alive. Much of early Arctic exploration was accomplished in missions searching for that expedition's fate. But the fate of Franklin and his men was not unique. Author Alec Wilkinson noted in his 2010 book, The Ice Balloon, that before the 20th century, more than 1,000 people tried to reach the pole, and according to an accounting by an English journalist in the 1930s, at least 751 of them died. Arctic exploration was a dangerous vocation, not for the faint of heart. In 1897, famous balloonist Salomon Andree had a plan that he believed would take the danger from the occasion. Following the prevailing winds, he expected that a balloon could make the trip across the pole quickly and without the dangers inherent in traversing the Arctic ice. Of all those Arctic explorers, Wilkinson notes, only Andree used a balloon. Salomon Andree was born in Sweden in 1854. In 1876, he traveled to the United States, where he worked at the Swedish Pavilion at the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. On the trip, he had a chance meeting with John Wise. John Wise was a pioneer in the field of ballooning. In 1859, his innovative balloon, the Jupiter, had carried 123 letters from Lafayette, Indiana to Crawfordsville, Indiana, to make the first official airmail delivery run for the U.S. Post Office. He had authored two books on ballooning, System of Aeronautics and Through the Air, a narrative of 40 years' experience as an aeronaut. Wise was particularly interested in wind currents. He was the first to discover the jet stream and was convinced that a good knowledge of wind currents could allow balloonists to successfully navigate great distances. Andree was inspired and began studying wind currents and set his sights on becoming a balloonist. The Aviation History Online Museum explains, Salomon Andree, a wiry, intense Swede whose system was constantly supercharged with energy, was only 22 when he tasted his first absorbing experience with balloons while working at the Philadelphia World's Fair. From that day on, he began to devote himself to the study of aeronautics. He was an individualist who could pursue one line of thought as tenaciously as a tightrope artist performing on the high wire. Old-line balloonists were astonished that a man so young and inexperienced could take to the air in varying weather conditions and never once exhibit any signs of fright. Andree's enthusiasm was despite the fact that ballooning was a very dangerous endeavor. In 1879, Wise and a passenger took off in a balloon called Pathfinder from East St. Louis, Illinois, expecting to catch high-speed wind currents that would carry them over Lake Michigan. Apparently, the winds did just that, as the body of the passenger, George Burr, was found floating in that lake. Wise was never seen again. But Andree was apparently undeterred. He convinced a Swedish newspaper to purchase a balloon for him to promote public welfare and science, which he named Svea. The Aviation Online History Museum explains, from that moment on, ballooning was his mistress, his religion, his entire life. He made weather observations in Svea and successfully made what the museum calls several daring and unprecedented flights across the Baltic Sea. But he had a plan beyond the Baltic Sea. The museum continues. Then, in 1895, Andree startled his associates by announcing, "It is possible and feasible for a balloon to fly to the North Pole." The website of Ocean-Wide Expeditions explains, on paper his idea appeared simple. Rather than attempt to master the barren and inhospitable landscape of the Arctic pack by foot, they would instead drift above it from the safety and relative comfort of a hydrogen balloon basket. In doing so, they aim to become the first people in recorded history to view the North Pole. Andree's novel idea sparked the world's interest. The Baltimore Sun noted in August 1895, the projected balloon expedition to the North Pole, under the direction of the Swedish aeronaut and scientist Mr. Andree, which he is planning to carry out next summer, will be starting from Spitzbergen and intended to make the whole distance to the pole, 3,700 kilometers, in about 6 days. Im Jan of Paris is now at work building the great airship for this expedition. Its construction will be such as to give it abundant supply of gas for 30 days, enable it to carry 3 men, a large number of scientific instruments, and provisions for 4 months' use. But the idea had its detractors. A letter in the London newspaper The Standard in February dismissed the plan. Mr. Andree certainly has no acquaintance with the conditions of ballooning in the polar basin. No one has. And if he essays in such expedition on hypothetical conclusions regarding the course of the winds, he is entering upon a most foolhardy enterprise in which he has everything to lose and little to gain. Andree responded, the criticism is hardly worth any attention, as the paper published an article on the subject without knowing the details of the plan. Nothing but ill health will prevent me from making the journey to the pole in 1896. I have a strong belief that the expedition will be successful, and an opportunity given to me to tell the world how it looks at the pole, whether there is water, or ice, or a continent. Actually, Andree did have a novel plan. He didn't count on the capriciousness of the wind, Wilkinson explains. The reason that Andree thought that he could make it to the pole was that he had believed he'd designed a balloon that could be steered. Hot air balloons and hydrogen balloons, of course, can only go where the wind blows them, but Andree had constructed a special system of heavy ropes that lay on the ground and were dragged. It would sort of impede the balloon and cause it to travel slower than air. And as soon as you're traveling slower than the air, as in a sailboat, for example, you can steer yourself because you can put up a sail. In addition, he would be taking along a renowned Swedish meteorologist, Nils Ekholm. Ekholm, along with Andree's enthusiastic assurances and a heaping dose of Swedish patriotism, allowed Andree to finance the expedition. The education website Gale Review explains, the Arctic balloon expedition was considered a bold, patriotic adventure in Sweden. It was supported by the Royal Swedish Academy of Science, had financial backing from Alfred Nobel, founder of the Nobel Prizes, and the Swedish king, and local newspaper Aftonbladet provided carrier pigeons for communication. Expectations were high. The Minneapolis Journal wrote in 1896, "Space forbids an extended description of the balloon, but it may be stated that every detail was most carefully considered. The silk envelope was specially woven for the purpose, and all the accessories are of the very best. No expense has been spared to make it superior in every respect. The weave of the cloth is so close that it is estimated that it will hold sufficient gas to navigate in the air for 700 days. As the journey is not estimated to require over 6 days, it would seem that the aeronauts are safe, but provisions will be taken for 2.5 months as a matter of precaution. Andree himself has conducted 11 ascensions and has not had a single mishap or the slightest hitch." The Portland Sunday Oregonian opined, 10 years ago, any plan of attaining the pole by means of a balloon sailing from a latitude not higher than that of Spitzbergen would have been scouted as the visionary illumination of one hardly better than a maniac. Today, the plan of Andree, however wise or unwise it may appear, however unmeritorious it may seem to those who are perhaps best acquainted with Arctic conditions and possibilities, receives at least respectful consideration. More than that, has received government or royal support. The year to come is likely put to the test the possibilities of polar aeronautics. Wilkinson writes that when the men in balloon left Sweden for Spitzbergen in June aboard the ship Virgo, 40,000 people saw them off. Of those who had helped him, Andree said that if he died in the attempt, the last thought that I at least will have is, what a pity I was not able to thank them. But it was not to be. Andree was proved wrong in his claim that only ill health would stop his attempt in 1896. A balloon hangar was constructed on Danes Island, Svalbard. The balloon was taken there and inflated inside the hangar, but the wind was uncooperative. With winds blowing from the north, the expedition could not launch. By August 16th, the opportunity had passed. Andree and his crew were forced finally to deflate the balloon and go home. Undeterred, Andree planned to return in 1897. Unfortunately, by then, Ekholm had soured on the plan, concerned that the balloon was not retaining its hydrogen as well as Andree promised. He even tried to persuade the king to withdraw his support. Andree was forced to replace him. In 1897, he would go with Knut Frankel, a 27-year-old civil engineer, and 27-year-old Swedish photographer Niels Strindberg to record the expedition. The winter did not go well. Not only did Ekholm leave the expedition, but Andree's friend and supporter, Alfred Nobel, died in December, as did Andree's mother. Yet he was determined to make another try. When they sailed for Spitzbergen in May, there was much less fanfare at the docks. The world prepared for the expedition. In April, the Kansas City Star reported that American whalers had been distributing pictures of the balloons to educate the ignorant little brown men of the Arctic as to the possibilities of balloon navigation. The concern was that, the paper explained, the Eskimo is a hard-headed little man, sharily given to speculation, and thus, the paper writes, natives may shoot the balloon. American whaling captains were thus asked to help convince the natives that the balloon was not a big devil. So please don't shoot the Swedes from the sky. The Winnipeg Tribune noted that Canadian officials were asked to assist if any saw the balloon. They were asked to make a note of the day and hour and its location and the direction of the wind and communicate the same to some government official. But it is further requested that if the scientists are in trouble and it is possible to render them assistance, to do so. The balloon hangar was found to still be in good condition and the winds were more favorable in 1897. On July 11th, the winds were favorable and the expedition prepared. They launched at 2:30 in the afternoon. The New York Times reported, the ascent was made under favorable circumstances. The wind was good, and all was well. But it wasn't. Wilkinson explains, as he took off, the ropes tangled, became untangled, and he lost them. And so he sailed off over the horizon, and he wasn't able to steer. Andree sailed over the horizon and was lost. The fate of the balloon was quickly a matter of speculation. On July 30th, the captain of a Dutch vessel reported seeing, at a considerable distance, a large object resembling a balloon floating in the water. The captain speculated that it may have been the wreck of Andree's expedition. The report was taken with a grain of salt. The location of the object the captain had seen would have been more than 1,000 miles from where the balloon had ascended. Hope was revived in August when reports came that a carrier pigeon had arrived in Syracuse, New York, carrying a cryptic message saying, latitude 85 degrees, 43 degrees longitude, 15 degrees east. We are going very slowly, very cold. Dogs are dead. Andree, August 17th. Andree had indeed taken homing pigeons along with him. The website Explorer's Web writes, the message was written in French. Despite the inconsistencies with Andree's previous messages and other important details, the local press still ran with it. Some people believe that this bird actually carried Andree's words and location all the way from the European Arctic to New York. Alas, however, the note turned out to be a hoax, easily determined from the fact that the expedition had taken no dogs with them. The reason for the hoax was never made clear. An expert wrote in the Chicago Times-Herald in September that, as a student of Arctic matters, as one who some years ago made special investigation of the practicability of Arctic ballooning, I find myself unable to coincide with what appears to be the prevalent view that Andree is certainly lost. He may be, he may not be. To me, his chances of safety appear to be about 1 in 2. In October, Mr. Richard Hurd, manager for the Arctic explorer Dr. Fridtjof Nansen, expressed the opinion that there is not the slightest doubt in my mind that Andree is alive, remarking that my opinion is sustained by some of the greatest scientists in Europe. Hurd explained that Andree was well prepared and was likely steadily carrying out the plans he so carefully laid out. Numerous reports and rumors were circulating, reporting that the balloon had been sighted by ships and stories of other pigeons being found. Another report claimed that the balloon had been seen from a village in Siberia. As late as December, the Rochester, New York Democrat and Sentinel reported that Professor Andree and his balloon had been located. Scientific men now say, the paper reported, that daring Arctic explorer and his 2 companions are safe and only waiting for the winter to break to show themselves. The balloon was thought to have landed in Siberia, where the Russian government has issued another ukase to its Siberian officials to make every effort to discover and aid the explorers. But it was all speculation. In fact, nothing was heard from the expedition in 1897 or 1898. They simply disappeared. But their fate would finally be revealed. In 1930, Norwegian sealers found remnants of the expedition, including the bodies of the 3 men, on a remote Arctic island. The balloon had flown for a mere 3 days, but had traveled in that time hundreds of miles. Included in what was found were journals and undeveloped photographs, raising Andree and his companions like ghosts. They had tried to pull their supplies on sledges, but they proved too heavy. They had built a shelter, only to have it destroyed as ice underneath shifted. They had successfully hunted polar bears. They had made it to tiny White Island, where they planned to stay out the winter. There they died, likely around the 8th of October, when the final journal entry was made. The remains were recovered and nationally mourned in Sweden. Andree's team's attempt represented both the daring and the naivete of the era of Arctic exploration, and for that alone they deserve to be remembered, but it also represents the unique mindset of the explorer. As Wilkinson said, I think his rationality, his engineering mind, his practicality succumbed to a certain degree, like a temptation that one finally submits to the idea of, I must. But then again, where would humanity be were it not for that special breed who were willing to gamble their lives on the idea of, I must. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.